Hello again. Tonight I'm going to read the story of Snow White. One winter's day, long, long ago, a queen sat sewing by a castle window. It was snowing outside, and she liked looking up and seeing the white, feathery snowflakes gather in the shiny ebony window frame. Suddenly, she pricked herself with her needle. She opened the window to cool her sore finger, and 3 drops of blood fell into the snow. The queen smiled and thought, "If only I had a child with skin as white as snow, cheeks as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony." In time, a daughter was born who looked just as the queen had wished. The queen named her little girl Snow White. Unfortunately, the queen died soon after the child was born. Within a year, the king remarried. His new queen was very beautiful, but she was also cruel and proud. This wicked queen had a magic mirror, and she would often look into it and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" Then the mirror would answer, "You, my queen, are the fairest of all." This reply always satisfied the queen, for she knew the mirror never lied. The years went by, and Snow White grew lovelier each day. The wicked queen was jealous of Snow White, but never more so than when the queen asked her mirror one day who was the fairest in the land. The mirror replied, "You, my queen, may have a beauty quite rare, but Snow White is 1,000 times more fair." The queen was filled with rage and envy. From that moment on, she knew no peace, for her hatred of Snow White grew stronger every day. At last, the queen called one of her huntsmen to her. She told him to take Snow White deep into the forest and kill her with his knife. "To prove that she is dead," she told him, "you must bring me her heart." The huntsman led Snow White deep into the forest, but he could not bring himself to kill the beautiful girl. He simply left her there and warned her never to return home. Then he shot a deer and took its heart back to the queen, who threw it into the fire. Meanwhile, Snow White wandered deeper and deeper into the woods. Dead tree branches struck out like bony, crooked fingers. Wild animals scooted past her, grunting and growling. The poor girl was terribly frightened. She ran and ran until she came upon a little cottage. When no one answered the door, she tiptoed inside. The little house was lovely. Everything was dainty and neat and very small. There was a table set with a clean, white tablecloth, 7 small plates, and 7 little goblets. Over by the wall were 7 little beds with fluffy covers. Snow White was hungry, but even so, she only took a bite of food from each plate and a sip of wine from each goblet. She then went over to the beds and tried each one until she found one that was comfortable. Soon Snow White was fast asleep. A short while later, 7 little dwarfs came marching and singing into the cottage. They were most startled to see Snow White asleep on the bed, but the little men were so taken with her beauty that they did not wake her. The next morning, Snow White was afraid when she saw the 7 dwarfs around her, but they were so kind-hearted that she soon told them her sad story. The 7 dwarfs then invited her to live with them, provided she do the cooking and housework. Snow White gratefully agreed. Each morning the dwarves left the house early and went to the mountains, where they mined for minerals and gold. They warned Snow White never to let anyone into the cottage. "Your wicked stepmother will soon discover you're here. Beware," they told her. Back at the castle, the queen picked up her mirror and asked who was the fairest of all. To her surprise, the mirror replied, "You, my queen, may have a beauty quite rare, but beyond the mountains where the 7 dwarfs dwell, Snow White is thriving, and this I must tell. Within this land, she's still 1,000 times more fair." The queen instantly realized that the huntsman had deceived her. Trembling with fury, she vowed to kill Snow White, and soon came up with a plan. She dressed herself up as a poor peasant woman selling apples. Then she crossed the 7 mountains to the 7 dwarfs' cottage, where she knocked on the door and called out, "Apples! Lovely apples!" Snow White looked out the window and said, "Please go away. I'm not allowed to let anyone in." "Never mind," said the peasant woman. "I'll leave you this apple as a gift." Snow White started to refuse, but the apple looked so rosy and beautiful that she hesitated. "Here," said the wicked queen, "let me show you how good the apple is." She picked it up, cut it in half, and took a bite. The apple had been so cunningly made that her half was harmless, while the other half contained poison. When Snow White saw the woman eat the apple, she accepted the other half, but no sooner did the girl take a bite of it than she fell down dead. The queen quickly returned home and asked her mirror, "Now who is the fairest in the land?" The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are the fairest of all." The dwarves were heartbroken to find their dear Snow White dead, and they wept for 3 days. They intended to bury her, but Snow White looked so alive, and her cheeks were still so red, that they put her in a glass coffin and carried it to the top of a woodland mountain. For many years Snow White lay in the coffin. She still looked as lovely as ever, as though she were not dead, but only sleeping. One day a prince came to the forest. When he saw Snow White in the coffin, he begged the dwarfs to let him take her back to his castle. He pleaded so desperately that at last the dwarfs agreed. The prince and his servants carried Snow White along the forest paths in her coffin. Suddenly, one of the servants tripped and the coffin fell to the ground. The piece of poisoned apple was jolted from Snow White's throat, and she sat up and looked around in amazement. The prince and the dwarfs were overjoyed. The prince knelt at Snow White's side and told her how much he loved her. When he asked her to be his wife, Snow White happily agreed and put her hands in his. That day the wicked queen gazed proudly into her mirror and asked who was the fairest of all. The mirror replied, "Fairest is she who, though she died, now lives to be the prince's bride." The queen was so furious that she hurled the mirror to the ground, and her cruel heart shattered into 1,000 pieces.